Section 20, page 93. Where did you come from? Madame Olenska asked. He told her and added, It was because I got your note. After a pause, she said, with a just perceptible chill in her voice, May I ask you to take care of me? I didn't need an asking. You mean I'm so evidently helpless and defenseless? What a poor thing you must all think me. But women here seem never to feel the need, any more than that the blessed in heaven. He lowered his voice to ask, What sort of a need? Ah, don't ask me. I don't speak your language, she retorted petulantly. The answer smote him like a blow, and he stood still in the path, looking down at her. What did I come for, if I don't speak yours? Oh, my friend, she laid her hand lightly on his arm, and he pleaded earnestly, Ellen, why won't you tell me what's happened? She shrugged again. Does anything ever happen in heaven? He was silent, and they walked on a few yards without exchanging a word. Finally she said, I will tell you, but where? One can't be alone for a minute in that great seminary of a house, with all the doors wide open and always a servant bringing tea, or a log for the fire, or the newspaper. Is there nowhere in an American house where one may be by oneself? You are so shy, and yet you are so public. I always feel as if I were in the convent again, or on the stage, before a dreadfully polite audience that never applauds. Ah, you don't like us, Arthur exclaimed. They were walking past the house of the old patron, with its cut walls and small square windows, compactly grouped about a central chimney. The shutters stood wide, and through one of the newly washed windows, Arthur caught the light of a fire. Why, the house is open, he said. She stood still. No, only for today, at least. I wanted to see it, and Mr. Van der Luyden had the fire lit and the windows opened, so that we might stop there on the way back from church this morning. She ran up to the steps and tried the door. It's still unlocked. What a luck. Coming in, we can have a quiet talk. Mr. Van der Luyden has driven over to see her old aunts at Rhinebeck, and we shan't be missed at the house for another hour. He followed her into the narrow passage. His spirits, which had dropped at her last words, rose with an irrational leap. The homely little house stood there, its panels and brasses shining in the firelit, as if magically created to receive them. A big vat of amber still gleamed in the kitchen chimney. Under an iron pot hung from an ancient crane, rush-bottomed armchairs faced each other across the tiled hearth, and rows of daubed plates stood on the shelves against the walls. Arthur stopped over and threw a log upon the embers. Madame Olenska, dropping her cloak, sat down in one of the chairs. Arthur leaned against the chimney and looked at her. You are laughing now, but when you wrote me you were unhappy, he said. Yes, she paused, but I can feel unhappy when you are here. I shan't be here long, he rejoined, his lips stiffened with the effort to say just so much and no more. No, I know, but I am improvident. I live in the moment when I am happy. The words stole him like a temptation, and to close his senses to it, he moved away from the hearth and stood gazing out at the black tree boles against the snow. But it was as if she, too, had shifted her place, and he still saw her, between himself and the trees, drooping over the fire with her indolent smile. Arthur's heart was beating insubordinately. What if it were from him that she had been running away? And if she had waited to tell him so till they were here alone together in this secret room? Ellen, if I am really a help to you, if you really wanted me to come, tell me what's wrong. Tell me what is it you are running away from, he insisted. He spoke without shifting his position, without even turning to look at her. If the thing was to happen, it was to happen in this way, with the whole width of the room between them, and his eyes still fixed on the outer snow. For a long moment she was silent, and in that moment Arthur imagined her, almost harder, stealing up behind him to throw her light arms about his neck. While he waited, soul and body throbbing with the miracle to come, his eyes mechanically received the image of a heavily coated man, with his fur collar turned up, who was advancing along the path to the house. The man was Julius Beaufort. Ah, Arthur cried, bursting into a laugh. Madame Alaska had sprung up and moved to his side, slipping her hand into his, but after a glance through the window, her face paled, and she shrank back. So that was it, Arthur said derisively. I didn't know he was there, Madame Alaska murmured. Her hand still clung to the Archer's, but he drew away from her, and walking out into the passage, threw open the door of the house. Hello, Beaufort, this way. Madame Alaska was expecting you, he said. During his journey back to New York the next morning, Archer relived with a fatiguing vividness his last moment at the Skyter Cliff. Beaufort, though clearly annoyed at finding him with Madame Alaska, had, as usual, carried off the situation high-handedly. His way of ignoring people whose presence inconvenienced him actually gave them, if they were sensitive to it, a feeling of invisibility, of non-existence. Archer, as the three strolled back through the park, was aware of this odd sense of disembodiment, and humbling as it was to his vanity, it gave him the ghostly advantage of being observing unobserved. Beaufort had entered the little house with his usual easy assurance, but he couldn't smile away the vertical line between his eyes. It was fairly clear that Madame Alaska hadn't known that he was coming, though her words to Archer had hinted at the possibility. At any rate, she had evidently not told him where she was going when she left New York, and her unexplained departure has exasperated him. The ostensible reason of his appearance was the discovery, the very night before, of a perfect little house, not in the market, which was really just the thing for her, but would be snapped up instantly if she didn't take it, and he was loud in mock reproaches for the dance. She had let him in running away just as he had found it. If only this new dodge for talking along a wire had been a little bit nearer perfection, I might have told you all this from town, and been toasting my toast before the club fire at this minute, instead of tramping after you through the snow, he grumbled, disguising a real irritation under a pretense of it. And at this opening, Madame Alaska twisted the talk away to the fantastic possibility that they might one day actually converse with each other from street to street, or even, incredible dream, from one town to another. This struck from all three allusions to Edgar Poe and Jules Verne, and such platitudes as naturally rise to the lips of the most intelligent when they are talking against time, and dealing with a new invention in which it would seem ingenious to believe too soon. And the question of the telephone carried them safely back to the big house. Mrs. van der Luyden hadn't not yet turned yet, and Archer took his leave and walked off to fetch the cutter, while Beaufort followed the Countess Alaska indoors. It was probable that, little as the van der Luydens encouraged unannounced visits, he couldn't count on being asked to dine, and sent back to the station to catch the 9 o'clock train. But more than that he would certainly not get, for it would be inconceivable to his host that a gentleman travelling without luggage should wish to spend the night, and distasteful to them to propose it to a person with whom they were on terms of such limited cordiality as Beaufort. Beaufort knew all this, and must have foreseen it, and his taking the long journey for so small a reward gave the measure of his impatience. He was undeniably in pursuit of the Countess Alaska, and Beaufort had only one object in view in his pursuit of pretty women. His dull and childless home had long since palled on him, and in addition to more permanent consolations, he was always in quest of amorous adventures in his own set. That was the man from whom Madame Alaska was avowedly flying. The question was whether she had fled because his importunities displeased her, or because she didn't fully trust herself to resist them. Unless, indeed, all her talk of flight had been a blind, and her departure no more than a maneuver. Archer didn't really believe this. Little as he had actually seen of the Madame Alaska, He was beginning to think that he could read her face, and if not her face, her voice. And both had betrayed annoyance and even dismay at Beeford's sudden appearance. But after all, if this were the case, was it worse, not worse than if she had left New York for the express purpose of meeting him? If she had done that, she ceased to be an object of interest. She threw in her lot with the vulgarest of dissemblers. A woman engaged in a love affair with the Beaufort classed herself irretrievably. No, it was worse 1,000 times if, judging Beaufort, and probably despising him, she was yet drawn to him by all that gave him an advantage over the other man about her. His habit of 2 continents and 2 societies, his familiar association with artists and actors, and people generally in the world's eye, and his careless contempt for local prejudices. Beaufort was vulgar, he was uneducated, he was purse-proud. But the circumstances of his life, and a certain native sharpness, made him better worth talking to than many men. Normally, and socially his betters, whose horizon was bounded by the Battery and the Central Park. How should anyone coming from a wider world not feel the difference and be attracted by it? Madame Olenska, in a burst of irritation, had said to Archer that he and she didn't talk the same language, and the young man knew that in some respects this was true, but Beaufort understood every turn of her dialect, and spoke it fluently. His view of life, his tone, his attitude, were merely a cursory reflection of those revealed in Count Alaski's letter. This might seem to be his disadvantage with Count Alaski's wife, but Archer was too intelligent to think that a young woman like Ellen Alaska would necessarily recoil from everything that reminded her of her past. She might believe herself wholly in revolt against it, but what had charmed her in it would still charm her, even though it were against her will. Thus, with a painful impartiality, did the young man make out the case for Beaufort, and for Beaufort's victim. A longing to enlighten her was strong in him, and there were moments when he imagined that all she asked was to be enlightened. That evening he unpacked his books from London. The box was full of things he had been waiting for impatiently. A new volume of Herbert Spencer, and a collection of the prolific Alphonse Daudet's brilliant tales, and a novel called Middlemarch, as to which there had lately been interesting things said in the reviews. He had declined 3 dinner invitations in favor of this feast. But though he turned the pages with the sensuous joy of the book lover, he didn't know what he was reading, and one book after another dropped from his hand. Suddenly, among them, he lit on a small volume of verse which he had ordered because the name had attracted him. The House of Life. He took it up and found himself plunged in an atmosphere unlike any he had ever breathed in books, so warm, so rich, and yet so ineffably tender, that it gave a new and haunting beauty to the most elementary of human passions. All through the night he pursued through those enhanced pages the vision of a woman, who had the face of Ellen Olenska. But when he woke the next morning and looked at the brownstone houses across the street, and thought of his desk in Mr. Littlebury's office, and the family pew in Grace Church, his hour in the park of Skytercliff became as far outside the pale of probability as the visions of night. "Mercy, how pale you look, Newland," Janie commented over the coffee cups at breakfast, and his mother added, "Newland, dear, I have noticed lately that you have been coughing. I do hope you are not letting yourself be overworked." For it was the conviction of both ladies that, under the iron despotism of his senior partners, the young man's life was spent in the most exhausting professional labors, and he had never thought it necessary to undeceive them. End of the section, page 99.